Loops in JavaScript is used for making decisions by validating a particular value against a given test condition and execute a particular code segment for any specific number of times until the given condition is satisfied. Hi everyone, this is Shantini from Edureka, and in today's session we will learn about loops in JavaScript and how they work. Now before we begin the session, let's have a look at the agenda. So first we will have an introduction to the JavaScript loops, and then we will move on and have a look at the different kinds of loops that we use in JavaScript, such as the for loop, while loop, DoWhile, and then ForIn Loop, and finally we will see the break and continue statement and how it works in JavaScript. Now before we begin the session, don't forget to subscribe to Edureka's YouTube channel to stay connected. Now what are these JavaScript loops? So JavaScript loops actually provide a quick and easy method of doing something repeatedly. So they are used to repeat an action any number of times without having to repeat the same line of code again and again. Now there are mainly two types of loops. First we have the entry controlled loops and then the exit controlled loops. Now in the entry controlled loops, the test condition is tested before entering the loop body. So here for loop and while loop are the entry controlled loops. And for the exit controlled loops, the test condition is evaluated at the end of the loop body. Therefore, the loop body will execute at least once, irrespective of whether the test condition is true or false. Now DoWhile loop is an exit controlled loop. So now let's move on and see what is for loop and how do we work with for loop in JavaScript. Now this method is actually a concise way of writing the loop structure. So a for loop repeats until a specified condition evaluates to false. So you can see that first we have a start point and then we have the item from our sequence and then we execute that statement. And if there are no more items left, we go to the end. But this loop will continue until there are items present in your sequence. So let's have a look at the syntax of our for loop. So in order to define your for loop, what you have to do is take the for keyword and then inside it you have to pass different parameters. So first parameter is our initialization condition. So here we will be initializing the value of our variable or what should be the condition. So this is basically our first parameter. Then next up we have our testing condition. Now what happens here is that we enter the testing condition that we are going to put for our for loop. For example, in the initialization parameter, we are giving the starting value for our variable. So here we can write x is equals to 0 or x is equals to 1. And here in the testing condition, we will provide the value or the condition till which this loop should go on. For example, you want the loop to go on till the value turns to 5 for x. So here your testing condition should be x less than or equal to 5. And finally, we have the increment or the decrement value here. Now what happens here is that this is our increment or decrement value for our variable. So we will check whether we are incrementing our variable or decrementing it. For example, either we can add +1 to our variable and go on with our loop, or we can go backwards and keep decrementing the value of our variable. Now once you have initialized all these three parameters, then you just have to write the statement inside that and you are done. So this is the syntax for your for loop. Now we will move on and see how this for loop can be implemented in a code and how it actually works. So here let's take an example and see how the for loop will work. So first let me just initialize a variable. Suppose let me take the variable to be x. And now I have to start with the for loop here. So let's see what are the values that I'm going to put inside these parameters. So the first one was my initialization condition. So here suppose I'm initializing the value of x to be 0. So this is my initialization. You can also put the value to be 1 or anything else. But here I'm initializing the value of my x to be 0. So basically the loop will start from the value 0. Now next up was the testing condition. So suppose I want this loop to go on until the value of x is less than or equal to 5. So this loop will stop or it will come out of the loop as soon as the value exceeds the value 5. So here I have given the testing condition to be x less than equals to 5. And finally I have the increment or decrement value. So here from 0, that is the initial value, my value needs to increment and go until 5. That's why I have to give the increment value, which is written as x plus plus. If you want to decrement, you would be writing it to be x minus minus. So now I'm done with the initialization of my x variable, and also I have inserted the testing condition and also the increment as well. So now I just have to get the output for this one. So for that I have console.log, and I'm going to take the variable x because I want the output for this one and see that how the output comes out to be. Now let's save this one. And here I have my HTML file where I have linked the JavaScript file, that is the example.js. So as soon as I run this HTML file, I will be redirected to this website. So for this I had given a head tag which says welcome to Edureka. Now to go to the output, all I have to do is right click, go to inspect, and then I will get my console here. Now once I open the console, you can see that the output is 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5. So what happens here is that I had initialized the value to be 0, and then I've given increment value here. So what happens inside the for loop is that the value of my x is incremented from 0 to 1, and then to 2, then 3, 4, and finally it goes till 5. The next moment, as soon as the value reaches 6, which does not satisfy my condition, that is x should be less than or equal to 5, it comes out of the loop and prints the variable. That's why it prints these particular 5 values, that is from 1 to 5. So this was about for loop and the syntax of for loop, and also how you can implement this loop in your code in JavaScript. Now next up we will talk about the while loop. So a while loop is basically a control flow statement which allows the code to be executed repeatedly based on a particular Boolean condition. Now this loop is similar to that of a repeating if statement. So what happens here is that you have a starting point and then you get to go to the condition, and if the condition is true, you go to the conditional code and then back to the condition itself. In case it's false, it goes to the end. So until you finish with that condition, your conditional code will keep looping here. Now to understand the while loop in a simpler way, let's see how this works. Now talking about the syntax, let's see what is the syntax for our while loop. So we just have the keyword as while, and inside this we will pass our Boolean condition. So here we do not have different parameters. Here we just have one condition, that is we either check for true or for false. This is how while loop is different from for loop. So you just insert the Boolean condition here, and then inside this you add your loop statements. So this is the syntax for your while loop. You just have to insert your Boolean condition and then continue with your loop statements, and then you will get to see how it works. So now that you know the syntax, let's move on and have a look at an example of while loop. So now here I'm taking another variable, that is variable x equals to 1. So here I'll be initializing the value because inside while loop we do not have different parameters to pass the values. So I'm initializing the value as 1 here. Now next up is my while and Boolean condition. So what I have to do is take the while keyword, and inside this I have to put my Boolean condition. Same, let me check for this one as well. Suppose I want the x value to be less than equal to 5. So the loop should come out as soon as the x value crosses 5. So now here is the difference between the for loop and the while loop. So here we just have the Boolean condition, and then we have to put it inside the curly braces. So what happens here is that the increment or the decrement value comes later on. So what we will do here is that we will insert the increment value here as x plus plus, and then I'm closing this. So now you can see that first we have initialized the variable value here, that is x equals to 1, and then we have given the Boolean condition here, that is x less than equals to 5. And finally, I have taken the output of x, and after that I have taken the increment value. So what happens here is that it increments from 1 and goes till 5. As soon as the value reaches 6, it comes out of that particular loop. So now let's save this and go back to the console. So now you can see that here we have the output as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Because in while loop, what happens is that we are starting from the initial point, that is 1, and we go on until the value crosses this condition. So here we have given the condition as less than equal to 5. So the loop goes on until the value of x is till 5. And finally, we have printed the values from 1 to 5 for x. So this is how the while loop works in JavaScript. Now next up, we have another different kind of loop, that is the DoWhile loop. It is almost similar to the while loop, but let's see how this one works. Now, as I said, this loop is similar to the while loop, but the only difference is that it checks for condition after executing the statements. In the while loop, we gave the condition beforehand itself, but in the DoWhile loop, what happens is that first we will execute the statement and then we will check for the condition. That's exactly why it is also an example of the exit controlled loop. So now let's have a look at the syntax for DoWhile loop. So here we have the do keyword, and inside that we have our statements. And finally we put up with the while keyword and insert our condition here. So as I said before, what happens here is that we first execute these statements, only then we go for checking the condition here. So this was the syntax for the DoWhile loop. Now let's see how this loop actually works. So we will take an example here and see how the DoWhile works. Now going by the syntax, so first I have to initialize the value for x. So for example, I'm taking the value of x to be 20 here. Then next up, I have to use the keyword as do. Now after this, I will be executing my statements and then I will insert my condition. So what happens here is that to execute the statement, I have console.log x and then I'm giving the increment value, that is x plus plus. Now once I'm done with this, finally I will insert my condition here. So for that I have the while keyword, and now inside this, suppose I'm giving the condition to be x less than 10. So what happens here is that it will only take the values if the value is less than 10. So here I have initialized the x value to be 20. So what happens here is that I have taken the condition later on. Now what happens, it will check if the condition is true or false. Now you can see that once I have executed this particular statement, my x value is 20. But according to the condition, my x should be less than 10, which is false. So it will go back and print the value to be 20 here, because here the execution of statement comes first and the condition comes later on. So now let me save this. And when I go to the console, you can see that the output here is 20 because it has first executed the statement and then checked the condition. So if the condition is false, we will go with the initial value of our variable. Now what happens if I change the value for my variable x? So suppose my variable value is now 5. So what happens here is that first it will execute the statement. So it will keep incrementing the value of 5 and then it will check the condition. Now you can see that here the condition is x must be less than 10. So now this satisfies the variable value as well. So the condition here is true. So now what will happen is the value of my variable x will be incremented and it will go on until the value is less than 10. So I should have the values to be 5, 6, 7, 8 and 9. Now let's see what do I get it as the output. So let's save this. Now when I go to the console, you can see that my output is 5, 6, 7, 8 and 9. So here what happened is it has executed the statement, and also when finally we have checked with the condition, it's satisfied with the condition as well. So we have printed the loop to be 5, 6, 7, 8 and 9. Now next up is the ForIn loop. Now this loop iterates a specified variable over all the enumerable properties of an object. For each distinct property, the JavaScript will execute the specified statements. So now let's see how this ForIn loop works, but first let's have a look at the syntax of the ForIn loop. So what happens is first we have our for keyword, and inside this we have our variable name. And then we use the in keyword here, and then we have objects. So what happens here is that it will take the variable name in your object And this is how the ForIn loop actually works. And after that, we have these statements. And this is exactly the syntax for your ForIn loop. So now let's see how this ForIn loop works in JavaScript. So let's take the example here. So for that, first we have to declare our object. So let me take the object to be characteristic. And here let me add certain characteristics. So suppose I'm taking the characteristic of a person. So for that, the first parameter is name. And then let me take a second parameter. So the second parameter would be age. Then we have a third one to be eye color. And finally, we have another characteristic as the height. So these are some of the characteristics of a person that I have defined here. Now, according to the syntax for the ForIn loop, we have the for keyword, and inside this we have our variable name. Suppose you're taking the iteration here, so we have the itr in characteristic. Now before that, we also have to initialize the variable here. So let's take the variable as itr for iteration. And finally, we have the for loop inside which we have our variable name in object. And this is our object, which is the characteristic. Now we will just take the output for this. So for that, we have console.log. And here we have our object name, that is the characteristic, along with the variable name, that is the itr. So now let's save this and go back to the console. So now you can see that we have got the output as name, age, eye color, and height. So what happens in this ForIn loop is that it takes the enumerable properties of our object, which is the characteristic, and for each of these distinct property, we execute the specified statements. So this was about the ForIn loop in JavaScript. Now we will move on and have a look at the break statement. Now talking about the break statement, here is a very simple syntax for this one. So we just have the break keyword, and here we have our label name. Now what is this break statement? So the break statement is used for jumping out of a loop. So it will help you in breaking the loop and also continue executing the code after the loop. So now let's see how this break statement works here. So first I have taken a variable I here. Now here I will have my for loop. So inside the for loop I will have my initial condition. So suppose I'm giving the initial value to be 0 for I. And then we have the testing condition. So for example, I should be less than equals to 5. And then finally, let's increment this value. Now in this break statement, we have another condition, that is the if condition. So here, let me take another condition as if I equal. So here we have the triple equals that will stop the loop as soon as it reaches that particular value. So I'm taking the condition to be I equals to 3. So as soon as the value of I reaches 3, we have the break statement here. So what happens is that the break statement will break the loop as soon as the second condition is reached, that is the value of I becomes 3. So now once you're out of this loop, now let's finally take the output for this one. So for that we have console.log as I. So now let's save this and go back to the console. So you can see that we have got the output as 0, 1, 2 because as soon as the value reached 3, there is a break statement here which broke the for loop. So we came out of this particular loop and only the 3 values have been printed. Now let me just change this value to 10 and this condition to be 5. Now let me save this code again and let's go back to the console. So now you can see that the values have changed from 0, 1, 2 to 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 because the condition has changed to 5. So as soon as the value reached 5, the break statement came out of this for loop and then we only got the values till 4. So now you understood how the break statement helps you come out of a particular loop and also it provides you another condition so that you can come out of the loop apart from the testing condition itself. So this is how the break statement works in JavaScript. Now we will move on and have a look at how the continue statement works. Now the syntax for continue is also similar to break, just here we will have the keyword as continue and then we will have a label name here. Now the continue statement breaks one iteration in the loop if a specified condition occurs. We saw in the last one that when we use the break condition, as soon as the condition was reached, we came out of the entire loop. But with the help of the continue statement, the loop will continue. It will just break at that one point when it reaches the specified condition. Now the difference between continue and the break statement is that the continue statement jumps over one iteration in the loop instead of jumping out of the entire loop. So I'll show you the example of how the continue statement works here. So let's have a look at the same example here. This is the example we used for our break statement. So just in place of break, we will be using the keyword as continue. So here we have a loop which goes on until the value reaches 10. And here we have a condition which says I value is 5. So let's see how this works. So let me save this and go back to the console. Now you can see that we have all the values in the loop printed here except for the value 5. So after 4, the loop came out or skipped one iteration where the value or the condition was if I was equals to 5. And then it went back to the loop and continued with the rest of the iterations. So this is exactly how the continue statement works. So suppose I change this value to 5 and then change the condition, that is the if condition, to 2. And now let's save this. And now when I go back to the console, you can see that I have the values as 0, 1, 3, 4 and 5. Only the iteration where the value of I was 2 is missing here. And otherwise it continues with the rest of the loop. So this was about the continue statement in JavaScript. So these were the different methods of executing JavaScript loops. So now I hope you have understood how the for loop, while, do while, ForIn and also the break and continue statement works in JavaScript, and also how you can use these loops while working with JavaScript here. So with this we have come to the end of today's session. Don't forget to share your opinion in the comment section below. Till then, thank you and happy learning.
I hope you have enjoyed listening to this video. Please be kind enough to like it, and you can comment any of your doubts and queries and we will reply them at the earliest. Do look out for more videos in our playlist and subscribe to Edureka channel to learn more. Happy learning!